I think I'm easy to coach, and Steph would say the same thing. And I think at times maybe difficult too, because I don't think there's many people that get guarded the way I do. I talked to Steph earlier in the day too, and I think we forget a lot of times.
Congratulations, what a statement, saying absolutely, positively nothing. That's how Stephen A. Smith reacted when Caitlin Clark defended her own head coach, a coach her own fans had loudly booed hours earlier. No defense, no accountability, no real answer. That was Smith's entire case against her, boiled down to just 3 words. Stephanie White never expected the jeers. Clark never expected the backlash that followed her own attempt to fix it. One hard foul turned into a race controversy, a fan revolt.
We might not be going away yet. It might have had a technical foul there just as this first half was expiring.
And a public fight between the league's biggest star and its loudest critic. Let's break it all down. The foul that started it all. It started on August 8th, 2026, in a game that had no business becoming this complicated. Less than 2 minutes into the first quarter, Sophie Cunningham broke into the open floor on a fast break. A clean lane, an easy finish waiting, then Dejounte Carrington came from behind. What was supposed to be a chase-down block turned into something else entirely. Carrington's hand caught Cunningham across the face and neck, and Cunningham hit the floor hard enough to draw blood from her own mouth. The foul was upgraded to a flagrant 2, and Carrington was ejected before halftime even arrived.
WNBA game on Saturday. Chicago Sky guard Dejounte Carrington was ejected and charged with a flagrant 2 foul.
The Fever survived the scare and closed it out, 90-86. But the game was already the least interesting part of the night. From inside the Sky's own locker room, Carrington posted directly to the Fever's page, and the words she chose were not the ones anyone expected. White privilege, she wrote.
Sophie Cunningham had nothing to do with that incident. She tweeted, "I've never once claimed that the assessment of the foul was white privilege,"
tying her own ejection to a claim about race and officiating that set off a firestorm across Wonbo media. 2 days later, Carrington herself softened the framing, telling reporters she hadn't meant the foul call specifically. But by then, the words were already out. The league fined Carrington $1,000 for the contact. No suspension, no further discipline. She played normally days later against Seattle. $1,000 for a hit that left a 2-time All-Star bleeding in front of a sold-out home crowd. A gap between punishment and injury that became its own separate controversy, running alongside the race debate rather than replacing it. The strangest twist came from the player who'd actually been hit. Cunningham herself pushed back on the race framing directly, pointing to her own ejection from the previous season as a counterpoint, a moment where she'd been sent off under similar circumstances and nobody had reached for the same explanation. If the player at the center of the controversy wasn't fully on board with how it was being described, why was almost everyone else so certain they had it figured out?
I think that's just a common foul. Nia Coffey is just trying to bring the ball through. Sophie Cunningham's face is right there.
I think it's a natural basketball motion.
I 100% think that's a natural basketball.
And then Stephanie White opened her mouth. In her post-game availability, she downplayed the severity of what fans had just watched, suggesting Carrington hadn't aimed for the neck and making clear she didn't personally take issue with the physical nature of the play. She also noted, almost as an aside, that she hadn't seen a clean replay when she first reacted courtside. That detail barely registered. What spread instead, across message boards, sports radio, and social media, was a coach who sounded to her own fan base like she was defending the player who had just sent her own star bleeding to the floor. She wasn't defending Carrington's character, and she wasn't dismissing what Cunningham had gone through. What she was doing, in the eyes of a lot of viewers, was choosing her words at exactly the moment they carried the most risk, and getting the read on the room badly wrong. It didn't help that this wasn't happening in a vacuum. 2026 had already become one of the most combustible seasons in league history. Sophie Cunningham's own comments earlier in the year about transgender athletes in women's sports.
Well, I mean, what are you going to do about intersex people who have, differentiating chromosomes beyond XX and XY? Like, there's a lot of gray area here, and I'm not a biologist, and I'm also not a professional basketball player. So
had made her a lightning rod for months. Cheryl Reeves' courtside shirt, worn in direct response to that debate, kept the tension simmering all summer. Her comments about one hard foul landed as a coach appearing to choose a side in a war that had nothing to do with her own team. This wasn't the first time Carrington's physicality had drawn scrutiny either. Earlier in the season, commentator Jason Whitlock had flagged a pattern in her play after separate hard fouls on other guards, warning the league needed to get ahead of it. To fans who remembered that warning, the hit on Cunningham looked like exactly what Whitlock said was coming, and White's attempt to explain away the intent behind the foul sounded less like context and more like an excuse. By the time calls for White's job started circulating, an unusually harsh reaction for a former coach of the year running a team outperforming its own preseason expectations.
Stephanie White, the head coach of the Indiana Fever, she gave an impassioned pregame statement on the negativity surrounding the WNBA.
The story had already stopped being about one flagrant foul. It had become a referendum on the coach herself, and the fans weren't finished. The boos didn't stop Indiana. 3 days after the foul, the Fever hosted the New York Liberty at home, and before a single point was scored, before the starting lineups had even finished being announced, Gainbridge Fieldhouse turned on its own coach. The boos weren't scattered, and they weren't brief. They were loud enough to be picked up clearly on broadcast, loud enough that White had no choice but to hear every second of it walking to her own bench in front of cameras that missed none of it. For a coach who had spent years building a reputation inside this organization, and a trophy case that included a Coach of the Year award, it was the kind of moment no amount of preparation actually prepares you for. How does a coach with a winning record end up booed by her own crowd? It's not a common sight in this league, or in most professional sports. Coaches get criticized in print, dissected on broadcasts, second-guessed by fans on their way out of the arena.
So we're going to have to work through that and make sure that we stay hydrated. But what an experience for those fans who might not be able to make it to any of our WNBA cities.
But jeered to their face by the people who show up every night specifically to support the team she runs is a different level of public rejection entirely. It's the kind of question that doesn't have a clean answer, and White didn't try to give one. In her pregame media availability, she addressed the backlash head-on, delivering what multiple outlets described as an emotional, defiant response. She named the hate directly. She named the fear-mongering and the divisiveness surrounding her since the Carrington comments, and made unmistakably clear that she had no intention of softening her position just to quiet a crowd that had turned against her. It was the response of someone who had decided, somewhere between the last game and this one, that she would rather be booed for standing her ground than cheered for backing down. Caitlin Clark heard every bit of it before she ever stepped onto the floor. And according to what she said afterward, she made her coach a private promise before the opening tip, that there was no version of that night where the Fever were losing for her. It's one thing to say that in a hallway before tip-off. It's another thing entirely to go out and back it up in front of the same crowd that had just booed the person you promised it to. They didn't. Indiana beat New York by 14, 106-92, pushing their record to 21-12 and jumping ahead of Atlanta in the standings. Several players on the roster described the win afterward as one dedicated specifically to their coach. Not a footnote to the game, but the entire point of it. For one night at least, the story had a clean answer.
So we also have to make sure that we're conservative. It's early. So players aren't going to play as many minutes as people want to see them play.
Doubt the coach, and watch her own players make you regret it on the scoreboard. Taken completely on its own, this is the kind of story a network builds an entire pregame package around. Adversity, loyalty, a decisive, unambiguous response on the scoreboard. If the story had ended in that locker room, with a blowout win and a coach vindicated by her own players, this would already be finished. That's the version of this story that fits neatly into a highlight reel. It has a beginning, a conflict, and a resolution, all inside one night. And for a few hours, that's exactly how it was being told. A fan base that had briefly turned on its own coach, corrected by a dominant win, and a locker room that refused to let her stand alone. It didn't end there, because for as loud as the win was, it wasn't the scoreboard that made headlines the next morning.
Indiana hangs on in overtime, 95-91 the final.
It was 4 sentences Caitlin Clark gave to reporters after the final buzzer, and what one of the most watched voices in sports media decided those 4 sentences actually meant. The answer that sparked controversy. Every reporter in that room knew exactly which question they were there to ask. It wasn't about the 14-point win, or the 21-12 record, or the standings shift against Atlanta. It was about the boos and what the league's biggest star was going to say about them on camera, live, with no time to script an answer. Reporters asked Clark directly about the treatment her coach had just absorbed. Her response wasn't political. It wasn't combative. If anything, it was almost gentle. A reminder, in her own words, that coaches are human too, that White has feelings, and that some moments are simply harder than others to sit through in public. She admitted the boos had genuinely bothered her. "That made me a little sick, to be honest," Clark said. Then she pledged her full, unconditional support. Her coach, her team, no exceptions. On its own, none of that reads as remarkable. It's close to the exact thing most star players say in this exact situation. Loyalty over confrontation, a defense of the person, rather than a relitigating of the controversy. Sophie Cunningham said something similar in her own words. That same stretch of days, backing White publicly as well. Neither player touched the actual substance underneath the story. Not the flagrant foul, not the white privilege claim that started the entire chain of events, not the $1,000 fine some fans still considered a joke. They defended a person. They left the controversy itself completely untouched. Notice what's missing from that answer.
Maybe you wouldn't be back. You don't tell military men and women to ignore an order.
Because it's exactly what makes it interesting. There's no mention of Carrington by name, no mention of the fine, no mention of whether Clark agreed or disagreed with the white privilege framing that had consumed an entire week of coverage. It reads, on close inspection, like an answer engineered to be unassailable, impossible to disagree with, and almost impossible to actually quote as taking a side on anything beneath the surface. Is that restraint, or is it avoidance? Athletes across every sport have faced this exact fork before. Defend the person you play for, or address the issue everyone's actually asking about. Rarely do those two choices point in the same direction. And Clark, like most of them, chose the person. A decision that cost her nothing in her own locker room, and as it turned out within 24 hours, quite a bit in the court of national sports commentary. It depends entirely on who's answering the question whether that was the right call, and one of the loudest media figures in the sport was about to answer it in a way nobody in Indiana was prepared for.
Going on right now, Caitlin Clark says she got cheap shotted against the sky.
Stephen A. Smith fires back. It took less than a full day for the answer to reach the one person in sports media least likely to let it pass without comment. The following day, August 12th, Stephen A. Smith posted his own reaction to Clark's comments, and it wasn't the reaction anyone defending White or Clark was hoping for. Reviewing her remarks on camera, Smith didn't waste time building up to his verdict. "Congratulations," he said. "What a statement, saying absolutely, positively nothing." That line alone would have been enough to dominate a full news cycle on its own. Smith kept going. His criticism widened well past Clark and White specifically into the entire league, arguing that 1BA players, as a group, consistently chose comfort over confrontation at exactly the moments that called for the opposite. He drew a pointed contrast to men's professional sports, suggesting that if male athletes faced a comparable controversy, both media and fans would demand direct, specific answers rather than accept a warm but vague show of loyalty as sufficient. It wasn't a new argument for Smith specifically, but it landed with unusual force this time, aimed directly at the most visible player in the entire league during the most watched week of her season. His message, boiled down, was simple. Stop hiding behind sentiment and start actually addressing what's happening. But was that fair? Smith wasn't disputing that Clark's love for her coach was genuine. Nobody watching seriously believed otherwise. His actual argument was sharper and narrower than that. A statement of personal support, however sincere, isn't the same thing as addressing the substance underneath it, the foul itself.
Fever head coach Stephanie White also voiced frustration over 2 earlier plays involving Clark, which she described.
White privilege claim, the $1,000 fine, and the wider tension the league has been sitting inside for most of the season, including the ongoing national debate over transgender athletes in women's sports, a topic Clark has said publicly she isn't ready to weigh in on yet. To Smith, silence dressed up in warmth toward a coach is still silence. To Clark, based on everything she's said and done publicly, her job on that podium was never to serve as the league's spokesperson for every controversy that finds its way to Indiana's front door. Neither of those positions is unreasonable, held on its own terms. A star athlete choosing to protect her coach instead of wading into league politics is defensible. A veteran commentator demanding more from the most influential player in the sport is defensible too. They are, however, completely incompatible with each other, and Smith made absolutely no attempt to pretend otherwise. This also wasn't an isolated outburst. Smith has spent years building a large piece of his platform around pushing Wanba Bay players toward more direct, confrontational media availabilities, applying that same standard again and again whenever a star responded to controversy with unity instead of specifics. His critics call it manufactured conflict, a media figure demanding drama for the sake of better television. His supporters call it the opposite, someone refusing to let athletes hide behind pleasant, forgettable sound bites, while real issues sit directly in front of them, completely unaddressed.
It's absolutely egregious and utterly disrespectful. And then number 2, you're coming in here aware of what happened 2 nights ago?
Both readings can be true of the exact same commentary at the exact same time, and this moment did nothing to settle which one is closer to the truth. There's a bigger question hanging over all of it, one that goes beyond this single week in Indiana. Does public pressure from a voice as large as Smith's actually push athletes toward more honest, useful conversations? Or does it just punish players for choosing caution in a moment that genuinely called for it? Reasonable people watching this unfold landed on both sides of that question within minutes of the clip going up, and the split didn't fall neatly along fan lines either. Plenty of Fever supporters agreed with parts of Smith's frustration, even while defending Clark personally. What almost nobody saw coming was that Smith wasn't finished, and his next target wasn't Clark at all. The Fever face, another crisis. If viewers thought Smith had said everything he had to say about this story, they were wrong. In a separate follow-up segment, released within the same news cycle, Smith turned his full attention to Stephanie White directly, and this time, the question wasn't about what she said, it was about whether she should still have her job at all. He mocked the idea that grace and composure alone could carry a coach through a controversy this loud, framing her entire public approach as a losing strategy dressed up in dignity. His verdict was blunt, and it wasn't softened for the cameras. None of it, the poise, the patience, the high road, would be enough on its own to save her. Is that fair to a coach with a winning record and a former Coach of the Year trophy on her shelf?
And in the post-game celebration, on the podium accepting the national championship trophy, what did Dawn Staley do?
Or is Smith simply saying out loud what a growing number of frustrated fans were already thinking, whether they wanted to admit it or not? That question is really the entire story sitting underneath everything else. And it's bigger than one press conference, one post-game quote, or one blowout win. On one side stands a locker room that has, consistently and deliberately, chosen loyalty and restraint as its public posture. Support your coach. Protect your teammates. Let results on the court speak, instead of press conference sound bites. It's an approach with a long track record of working in professional sports, precisely because it keeps a team's focus internal instead of handing outside critics a running commentary to react to. On the other side stands a media voice arguing that restraint, in a moment already saturated with race, politics, and national scrutiny, doesn't read as maturity so much as evasion, and that avoiding the hard conversation doesn't make the pressure disappear. It only delays the next flashpoint. Smith's entire career has been built on the belief that silence, even well-intentioned silence,
we're awful defensively all year long. You didn't hear that about a Tom Thibodeau team. They better get it together. Time's running out.
eventually gets read as an answer of its own. In his framing, every day this story goes unaddressed directly is another day it festers instead of resolving. Both sides have a case buried in there, whether fans want to admit it or not. Clark and her teammates aren't obligated to serve as commentators on every controversy swirling around their league. A player declining to freelance opinions on an unresolved, sensitive topic in a press scrum is neither new nor unusual anywhere in professional sports, and plenty of athletes across every league have earned genuine respect for exactly that kind of discipline. But Smith's underlying point isn't wrong either. A warm, vague statement of support doesn't actually resolve anything. And the same crowd that booed White on August 11th is very likely to be back the next time this exact controversy resurfaces, whether that's in a week, a month, or the moment the fever faced the sky again. Crowds don't forget this quickly, and neither, it turns out, does the schedule. Nothing about Clark's words, or White's defiant pregame stand, actually settled the original dispute. Not the foul, not the white privilege claim that sparked it, not the $1,000 fine some still call an insult, and not the larger conversation the league has been navigating all season long. What those words actually bought.
This is more for an online community that's trying to create narratives that simply don't exist.
In the most literal sense possible, was one good night and one lopsided win. And the clock on this story is already running. The Fever and the Sky are scheduled to meet again on August 23rd. The same two teams, the same building tension, and barring a trade or an injury, the same Dejounte Carrington standing across the court from Sophie Cunningham for the first time since the flagrant foul that started all of this. If the controversy hasn't cooled by then, Indiana won't get to control when these questions come back up. They'll simply have to answer them again, live, in front of a crowd that has already shown exactly how it feels, and in front of a media landscape that has just spent a week deciding it isn't willing to let this go quietly. So which side is right? The coach and her star player choosing loyalty over conflict, or the commentator insisting that loyalty alone was never going to be enough? 2026 has already proven this league won't let that question go unanswered for long. Whether the Fever are ready for what comes next isn't really up to them anymore. So who actually won this argument, Clark or Smith? One flagrant foul turned into a race controversy, a fan revolt against a winning coach, and a public fight over what leadership is even supposed to look like. Clark chose loyalty over confrontation. Smith demanded substance over sentiment. Neither one backed down, and neither one was entirely wrong. 9 words. That made me a little sick, to be honest. Is all it took to start this whole fight. And on August 23rd, Indiana and Chicago meet again. Same tension, still unresolved. Drop your take in the comments, subscribe for what happens next, and hit like if this finally connected the dots.